Hello, everyone, and welcome to this inaugural conversation here on Purple Chorus. I'm delighted to have with me today the Emeritus Professor in Neuropsychiatry with special interest in neuroanatomy and disorders of movement, including especially epilepsy, the author of several books on neurological and psychiatric themes, and researching on how music can be used to successfully treat several disorders, and once described as the quintessential scientist as well. That was in 2004. Somebody referred to you as the quintessential clinical scientist. So, Dr. Michael Trimble, hi. Very nice to see you again.
Hello. Hello.
So, obviously, you and I have met on numerous occasions, but there will be people watching this podcast, this interview, who don't know anything about you. So would you like to give a brief overview as to who you are?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I first met you on board a boat, on a big ship, and it was all to do not with epilepsy particularly, but with music. But the link to epilepsy was soon struck up, and we've maintained our contact over time with a few things that have developed since then, which I'll come back to in a moment, which you, again, have been involved with. Mm-hmm. But my work has been, well, as a neurologist and a psychiatrist, and there's a meeting point between those two disciplines, which is neuropsychiatry. And the whole point about that is that you need to know your neurology and your psychiatry before you can really go far with research, but also with understanding things. But the third aspect to that is neuroanatomy. And so many, don't really say this, but so many of my neurological colleagues don't really know very much that they ought to know about the basic neurophysiology and the neuroanatomy of how the brain works in relationship to, we're now talking about music, but that's a general point. But I'm always surprised. In fact, I gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago in Stockholm, and I always start out by saying, does anybody here know so much about epilepsy? And it was a general audience, and a few hands went up, which was helpful. But then I said, and how many of you know anything about music? Not a single hand went up. And but everybody knows about music now, and it wasn't begun with Spotify, but it's difficult to go to any media area, whether it's television, radio, or whatever, without somebody saying something about music, and then how music will make you feel certain things, and usually it's how to make you feel better.
Yeah.
Now, that's the starting point of Spotify, which I'll come back to again in a moment. But Spotify, it seems to me, says, if you like this, you'll like that. Or if you want to go to sleep, you use this. If you want to get up, we use it. And of course, it's a huge organization. And but it certainly has been a starting point. And from our point of view, which I'll come on to in a short while, but Nigel Osborne and others early on in days of developing the system that is used with us started out with Spotify. And Spotify didn't get on so well, or they didn't get on very well, because they thought Spotify wanted something too simple.
Yeah.
And it didn't have anything to do particularly with the interlink between music and the brain. Mm-hmm. And so what I've been researching specifically are links between environmental events, noise basically, but then moving specifically to music and the central nervous system, and how the two are conjoined together. Now, you've met Nigel Osborne, and yes, and you've been at some of the epilepsy conferences. You know, he's a very, very talented composer. What he doesn't know about music, but what he also doesn't know about languages and what is quite magnificent. But the system that we have used, which he and several other very, very talented people have developed, called the X system, has to do simply with taking biological markers. And in the case of epilepsy, we're talking about the EEG particularly. And then for the audience, the EEG is when you take patterns of rhythms in the brain and you record the rhythms from various parts of the brain. And in people with epilepsy, at some point, you usually are able to detect some abnormality in one part of the central nervous system, which is linked to a seizure. And that really is the starting point to take the brain signal, the EEG abnormality, which the brain is filled with harmonies of its own in terms of the structure of the way that the music travels through the brain. Come back to that in a moment. But the harmonies that are within the structure of the brain, the electrical structure of the brain, can then be recorded from the EEG and transformed into the harmonies of music.
Yeah.
Now, this is a highly sophisticated system, as you can imagine. But harmonies are harmonies,
Yeah.
you know, and the great Lord created a world full of harmonies. And we know that in our lives, we want harmony and not disharmony. Yeah. Anyway, so the system has been to look at the EEG, turn those aspects of the electrochemical system into music. Now, the music is really sought out by algorithms of thousands of tracks. And according to Nigel, in the system, there's music from Africa, India, but obviously Western world, etc. And the system identifies areas of music, that is, particular songs, if I can put it simply like that, particular pieces of music that are best harmonized to the brain. And the idea is to entrain the activities in the music, let's just say the rhythms of the music, with the rhythms of the brain. Now, but you can do that with much more than just rhythms, because one's looking at the whole stream of what goes on in the brain when you hear a piece of music. So going back a moment or two, most people say, the music affects my brain. Well, just turn on some music and look at the way the kids jive with each other, or and dance. You know it alters your brain. How does it alter your brain? Well, but the issue is that it's a system which can be entrained to external events. And again, if you just think of the word, and if you're, let's say just listen to somebody making a rhythm, you find yourself hearing that rhythm, and even if and getting rid of a rhythm you sometimes can't do, because you've been entrained to a piece which has got certain features which alters the brain. Now, the question is, altering the brain sounds fine, makes you feel better if you listen to some music, and then an hour or two later you say, well, it's very nice, thank you very much. That's not our aim. Our aim is to alter through altering cerebral systems or brain systems, the brain rhythms that are abnormal towards normality. We're not claiming that you're going to come out with a totally different brain, which is the one you were born with, but certainly one, as we were able to show, selecting the music, playing back the music, I'll come back to that in a second, playing back the music, and then seeing the change in the EEG abnormalities. And you're familiar with this guy, but the things like, there are certain things that you can see, like spikes and waves, which say this is related to an epileptic seizure, or a bilateral, that's two-sided abnormalities of rhythms, which again are shown to be part of seizures. So we are able to decrease the frequency of those seizures, the severity of them, and another thing or two I'll come back to. But the point about changing what we do, we play the music at night. So we have the first things, we take an EEG of the patient's brain. We then select from that EEG, by the way, it's an overnight recording, okay? Overnight recording, we select the EEG abnormality in that brain, and that's the bit where we're harmonizing to the music. And then when we've got the music to identify with that, we play it back overnight. So it isn't people who can say, oh, I didn't like that, or I prefer to listen to something else. It's actually the rhythms, the musics, the harmonies, and all the features of music that we want to capture, not whether you liked it or not. But obviously, we've never found, well, we haven't found one that's made people feel worse, but there's certain EEGs that don't harmonize so well. For example, it's not so good with Wagner, right. But it's extremely good with Mozart. And you'll be able to explain, I know you play Mozart music and whatever, you know how the specific rhythms and the way that Mozart pulls you in motorically, moving all the way. So anyway, but the point is we've got the music that the brain likes, and we have an MP3 player or whatever it is that people want, and it goes home with mum and dad or with whoever it is or the patient, and they play it every night, overnight. So it's not taking 2 tablets a night. It's actually just putting this music on, not loud, not enough to wake you up and anything like that, but just doing that. And that's then it's a perfectly harmless way of altering EEGs in people with epilepsy. Now, I should say, Guy, that we are using it with people who have epilepsy which has been incurable in the sense of recurrent seizures that haven't responded to probably 10 or 11 different anti-epileptic medications. Mm-hmm. And we can't use it particularly with people who really need epilepsy surgery in the sense of having, carcinoma or something, or the temporal lobe epilepsy, which is something which is not responded to medications, but there's a seizure area. So it's not for people with that degree of severity. But the system we have found is better for those with generalized epilepsies, and that's when you get both sides of the brain affected at once, than with the isolated single abnormalities. It still works for the single, but the generalized abnormalities are significant. Now, I don't want to make it too complicated, but if you think about music as sound, then what is the most important sensory input that Homo sapiens, the human, experiences? And the most important, well, in the womb, in the fetus in the womb doesn't see anything. No. But they hear. They hear. And you may know there's these investigations where they have put music onto the abdomen of the pregnant woman, played some sections of music, and then after the kid is born, tested to which piece of music the infant appears enlightened to and most emotive to, and basically relates to what they heard in the uterus. Absolutely. So one of the first things that's important to Homo sapiens, well, probably other animals too, I don't know, but by the way, Homo sapiens is really the only living animal that responds emotionally to music in the way that we do. But a lot of animals, of course, do respond to music. Chimpanzees don't like music. They tend to go to the other side of a cage if you put it on.
But anyway, I believe elephants do like music.
Well, yeah, I'm sure. Well, yes. Again, their brains can be entrained as well as that. Yes, but you're quite right. They are. But the point about it is that with the system, this can be used at home and is viable, and that is perfectly harmless. So that's the music therapy that we've been looking at for people with epilepsy. Just want to say something else, that it's not just epilepsy, because we can do the same with, say, Parkinson's disease, with the abnormalities that you find in the brain there. Obviously, people are looking quite carefully at dementia. But the other thing that we found very significantly overnight, that recording, we looked at what's called REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. So in all mammals, actually, sleeping is composed of certain aspects of the sleep cycles where you, in humans, dream, but the pattern of the EEG is very abnormal. And there's 4 or 5 sessions that go on through the night, and it's called REM, R-E-M, sleep. Yeah. Now, REM sleep just happens to be anticonvulsant. And nearly every patient that we've looked at with these continuing seizures has very low, or no REM sleep. So what we found is that we bring back REM sleep in these people, and that again is an anticonvulsant aspect of the treatment.
So that would be for patients with nocturnal seizures, perhaps.
Well, yes, you're quite right. But one of the things that's important in people with epilepsy, when you ask what the problems are, whatever their epilepsy, it usually will come up as poor sleep, bad sleep pattern, bad sleep habits, whatever. But the other link to that is melatonin. Right. We've also found that we increase the level of melatonin in the central nervous system on the overnight recordings. And melatonin in and of itself is actually anticonvulsant. So the music has this ability to alter not only EEG rhythms, but also we're looking obviously at the hormonal aspects of it, changing some of the autonomic aspects that relate to our emotions. And now we think we can probably help people with sleep disorders who have this problem as well. So it brings me down to my last point, but back to what the fetus hears. When you think about it, sound is what you and I and mammals hear quicker than actually seeing, for a number of reasons. But if it's dark, if it's light, you need to get out of the way if the sound is right or wrong. So sound is extremely important. But what the music does, it goes in here and it travels all the way up to the top, the cortex of the brain, quicker than any of the other inputs. So the visual input. So if I'm looking at some paintings now, I've got some nice paintings in my room here, but I don't see the painting directly. I just see an image which is reflected. Whereas with music, you don't have anything that's reflected. You have something that goes straight in and travels all the way through the brain. And people have done this, looked at the harmonies that are created in the music in various nodal parts of the brain to note that the harmonic resonances actually travel through the brain. And so it's a very, very quick way of getting into our central nervous system. And that's, I think, why this is not really, I guess it is, it is a bit strange to say it, but before our ancestors were talking to each other like we are and chatting away, they used music before the kind of logical language that we use. And for early ancestors, the music was quite logical as well. Anyway, I'm sorry that's a little bit long, but I hope it's
Oh,
not.
that is a phenomenal answer. Out of curiosity, I've never asked you this. Are you a musician yourself?
Yeah, I'm quite honest to say I am not a musician, although like everybody, no, not like everybody else, I did sing in the choir. I did have a banjo that I was in a banjo group. Well, I was a banjo player, in a jazz group. In when I was in the hospital, by the way, the junior doctors these days, they really don't have to shout and scream. I used to do 6 nights out of the week in the hospital, and often there didn't know what to do. Well, I was waiting for somebody to call me, and between times, anyway, I used to have piano lessons, and then I just, you're brilliant. I've heard you many times. You've got a lovely voice. You've got a marvelous way to put together the epilepsy experiences, but not only that, and play so beautifully. But I think you must have had a moment when you realized, or somebody realized, that you have a special talent. You can sit down and you can pick up the music and you can take it from there. I got to a state, not a state, but I realized this is not for me. I mean, I can't pull it out. And I gave up playing at the local pub piano very early on. But I think I would have. It's a great handicap to be a skilled musician, as you know. You can't suddenly. Well, because you have to practice and you have to do certain things over and over again. And I think that the musicians I know, but the composers I know, just have a considerable area of ability, which most other people don't have.
That leads me to another question. Composers, are composers' brains particularly different in any way to the brain of a non-composer? Is there any noticeable difference from a medical perspective? Obviously, from what they can create, that's a difference. But from a neurological perspective, is there any difference between my brain and the brain of a non-composer?
Yeah, but there would have to be. But it's also probably different from the man who sells newspapers. I mean, so the individual brains, of course, are very different. But it's structured in the same way. Our brains are structured to be able to take from the world into ourselves, so that we can actually move to the next moment in what we do, moving forwards, going backwards, whatever. But we need to be able to bring together the brain to the outside world. So our brain actually is it is homophilic. It's very, very interlinked. The map in the brain is the map of the world, obviously transfigured in many ways. But you did say something interesting. In terms of psychiatric problems, composers rate very highly in what is now called bipolar disorder. And with a number of composers, it did become so extreme that it meant that they, well, in the days when there were no treatments for that kind of thing, ended up losing their skills that they had in composition. So I think there is something extremely important interlinking through poetry. So again, one tends to think, I can't prove this, but one tends to think that the early language that was developed in communication between small groups of Homo sapiens would have had a lyrical link to them. And so as you know, there's a great link, an important link between music and poetry. There's well, I don't need to go into the main differences, but a number of poets, as you probably know, have the same problem with psychiatric difficulties. The interesting thing is, I'm not sure if you were at the meeting when I presented some of this. We're in Brno, I think. Was it in Brno?
Last
No.
time I saw you was in Cardiff.
Oh, okay. No, this was well before this. Anyway, but I was presenting these data and pointed out that could not find a single well-known composer who had schizophrenia.
Right.
So there were many with bipolar disorder,
Mhm.
but none with schizophrenia. And I'm talking there really about schizophrenia as we know it,
Mhm.
as opposed to schizophrenia spectra or things like that. But none with schizophrenia. And nobody came back and said, "Oh, my uncle had a whatever." But it's there is that difference in the psychiatric presentations.
Yes, I mean, for in my particular case, I don't mind saying so, but in 2012, early 2013, I actually had a nervous breakdown, and the one thing that never wavered at all was my musical ability, my musical skills. That never went away. In fact, when my seizures were very, very active, even though I couldn't string a sentence together, I could still compose and I could still play. So it's interesting that whilst other parts of the brain were rebooting or just not functioning properly, the part of my brain that was obviously responsible for remembering how to put notes together and come out with lyrics, etc., was working absolutely fine.
Yes, it may be comforting to you to know that's the same with Alzheimer's disease,
Right.
in this sense. I'm playing with this a little bit, but in this sense that people with with advanced dementia, Alzheimer's disease,
Yeah.
if you go to a nursing home and you see people there, um, they always have music therapy there, but it's music therapy in the way that they want to hear the songs that they knew in the 19. No, it's my old man said
Yes.
follow,
Yeah.
but so they can't remember necessarily who it is who has come to see them,
No.
but they have the ability to respond to the music.
Yes.
So again, in terms of the structure of the brain in relationship to music,
Mm.
it is different compared to that which allows somebody to remember where they are, let alone as to who is with
Mm.
them.
Yes.
So that's one thing. There have been some very ill composers where they have obviously lost their ability to continue to compose. I mean, Ravel in his later years, who was, I'm sure you know, was a wonderful pianist
Mm.
and does wonderful music, particularly of the type that you've got from French development of French classical music with Debussy and whatever. But Ravel went off the lines and people began to realize that he was very unwell.
Mm.
And he, in the later days of his illness, he was able to remember his own pieces of music,
Mhm.
but he could no longer pick up or compose new pieces, or
Right.
indeed recognize pieces that weren't his. So his early abilities for his music were
Mhm.
retained.
Yeah.
He died of what would now be called a frontotemporal dementia, not Alzheimer's disease. But
Right.
the way that I suggested earlier on that music it becomes embedded before you're actually born,
Yes.
it does have this at the other end of life, a saving grace, actually, in the sense that
Yeah.
music becomes a comforter
I
for
mean,
people with, like dementias.
yeah. I mean, certainly when my mom was carrying me, there was particular music that she used to listen to every day.
Mm.
And I still very much have a very strong emotional attachment to the music that my mom listened to when she was carrying me. For example, Mike Batt's song that Barbara Dixon recorded, Caravans, you know,
Hmm. Hmm.
the song Don't Cry Out Loud, uh, things like that. There was an LP that my mom had called The Love Album, which I think she's still got actually. And she used to play it on a daily basis. And from a very early age, I had a very strong connection with those songs. And certainly influenced me as a composer because I would say music from that period was what I would refer to as orchestral pop. So that
Hmm. Hmm.
melody line is actually what I would refer to as the sandwich filler, so that there's beautiful orchestral conversations happening above and below the melody line. And as a composer, that's very much what I aimed at from a very early stage. Uh,
Do you ever get the earworms?
yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yeah. Some sometimes I just cannot get a. Sometimes it's a line, not an entire song. It might just
Mm.
be one line that just will not leave me alone. You know?
Mm.
Um, one of the other neurological connections with music that I became aware of when I started researching is musical hallucinations. Uh,
Yes, they occur. They're I think they occur particularly with strokes,
right.
and so and it's there's a lot of individual cases that have been reported, and it is well known, and it's very uncomfortable actually.
Mhm.
And we've not thought about producing some method of looking at that with the X system. But again, it's an avenue that might be explored. In other words, how to alter the aberrant activities that are going on, leading to these earworms, basically.
Yeah,
But it is again just quite well known. But I don't believe that it's gone much further than that. It's been very difficult to do studies, if you like, on a large enough number of people. But
yeah,
it's if it's usually elderly people who do have strokes,
right.
and then it comes on, and it's very disturbing.
I mean, certainly when on a different line, when I talk to people about the interrelationships between music and epilepsy, when I mention musicogenic seizures, which was my first line in, they become extremely surprised that music can actually be harmful for the brain. But what I always say to people is most things actually have a flip side. So if something can be bad, it can be good. If something can be good, it can be bad. And obviously, when we break music down, all we're talking about is a series of vibrations.
Well, there you
So
are. Yes,
yeah,
entrainment again. Yeah,
yes, exactly.
yeah,
So if you get the wrong series of vibrations
yeah,
accessing the brain, then yes, of course, it can be
yeah.
detrimental. I know it's a rare form of complex reflex epilepsy. Um,
Yeah, it's very interesting that they trigger epilepsies. There are some people get that kind of system with reading a certain word
yes,
or a section, like a paragraph, or not a paragraph, a sentence,
yes,
which somehow they've read, and if they see that. But so music is part of that,
yeah,
and that's been studied really, really quite a lot.
yeah,
And basically, you have to treat it by avoiding
yes,
listening to certain things. But it is interesting that it's very ad hominem, but it can be just a certain musical phrase,
yes, yes.
um,
In the
or
case,
or a loudness actually
yeah.
can do it as well.
In the
Yeah,
case of a young Japanese girl, she only had a seizure when she heard "Happy Birthday," so that was
yeah,
relatively easy to pin down
yeah,
and to
yeah,
avoid, you know.
yeah.
And from the work that I looked at with Dr. Peter Kaplan, it would appear that it's more prominent in female patients than
Right, I didn't know that. Yeah, yeah.
man. So, and one of the things that I find interesting is when looking for authentic musical representation of epilepsy in popular music of the 20th century and 21st century, it seems very, very difficult to find. Dr. Mia Tuft is one of the people who's examined this. And whilst you have examples of Ian Curtis from Joy Division, Prince, uh, and I think it was Neil Young who also had epilepsy, there does appear to be somewhat of a drought of authentic experiential representations of living with epilepsy using the musical medium. I mean, I said that to you when we met in Prague, because that symposium was on the use of the arts, plural, as a
Yeah,
means of non-verbal of expression of experience of epilepsy.
yeah.
I dared to stick my hand up at the end of the symposium, led by Stephen Schachter. Um, I said, well, I feel that music has been very underrepresented here because there were lots of examples, such as literature, like third person autobiographical writing. Uh, but of course, third person autobiographical writing can be applied to songwriting as well. You know, if I have a traumatic experience that I don't want to own, if I don't want to use the word me or I could write a song, and then it becomes the character in the song, not me. So I'm still expressing the experience without saying I feel like this. And the example that was given was the belief that Alice in Alice in Wonderland was actually Lewis Carroll.
Hmm.
And I think the jury is still out on that one. But those who support the theory say that when you take the elements of the story, the sensation of falling down the hole, the disproportion of the surroundings, the audiovisual hallucinatory phenomena, the eat me, drink me being the medication, the Jabberwocky being the brain itself, and the battle of the cards being the neuronal activity, it it is plausible that that is a very accurate description of an epileptic seizure.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I can see that. I think I probably read. No, I don't think I read about that. But there was something that I said Brno, but actually it was in Prague that
right.
you gave that, and that was where I presented data about music, rather linked to epilepsy a little bit, but it was to do with crying.
Right.
Which of the arts
Mhm.
were related to the human response of crying?
Right.
And the point about that was that Homo sapiens, the species we belong to, is the only living species that cries emotionally. And you may say, well, the elephant does. Well, I don't, the elephant, no, not saying the elephant doesn't get bereavements or whatever, but they actually crying emotionally
Mhm.
is a highly important special feature of human emotion.
Mhm.
And doing the survey that we had done in several countries, the relationship between the different art forms
Yeah.
and crying,
Mhm.
at the top was music. People,
Interesting.
you very rarely find people who cry emotionally to architecture, to sculpture. Interestingly, not so many people respond emotionally to a painting in terms of the number that do to music. And the nearest runner you'd think may have been poetry.
Mhm.
Actually, it wasn't poetry, it was reading novels.
Right.
And I eventually managed to publish a paper on the idea that novels are just as important as music in terms of the ability to lead people into emotional states which are very important to us as human beings, namely the ability to experience all kinds of emotions, but particularly to do with loss and bereavement and sadness, but also happiness, related to the arts.
Mm-hmm. And
so, but music is at the top. Then comes reading novels, not biographies, but reading novels.
Right.
But then down at the bottom were things that are lovely, like architecture, particularly didn't do very well, and mathematics. Reading mathematics didn't do very well either.
It might have made me cry at school because I didn't understand it. But
that's right. Yes,
but not because of the beauty of it. Yeah. But and also with regards to crying, it's interesting that crying is an actual necessary bodily function in order, like a detoxifying process. So I get very annoyed when people say, "Oh, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry," and it's like, well, actually, there is a reason why people need to cry. You know?
No, I did, but it as I say, it's exclusive to being human.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As by the way, and this is a bit tough, but as I occasionally say to an audience, I say, who in this room has never experienced emotionally a response to music that gives you tingles or leads you to tears?
Yeah.
And there's always somebody who puts their hand up at the end, and I say, I do feel so sorry for you. Because again, it's a basic part of being human.
It is, absolutely. And obviously for different people, it's different tonalities, or it might just be one line lyrically that will trigger that point. One of my favorite lines, I went to see the late Glenn Campbell on his farewell tour, and the album was called Ghost on the Canvas, which I thought was a brilliant name anyway. But one line in that song was, "We dream in colours, others they colour their dreams." And I just thought, what a phenomenal lyrical line. You know.
Well, also the memories. The dreams are, of course, memorial in some way, but it is often the memories with music that come together, leading to a nostalgia in particular. That brings you back. The music brings you back, and you might think, oh yes, I remember where I was. I was in this room, and then actually, it isn't necessarily the room or the place which is in the background, but it's the music which is constant because it returns.
Yes.
So
there's studies that say the same is true with regards to addiction as well.
Yes. Of course. Yeah.
And if they hear a piece of music, they will remember where they were and what they were doing when they heard that piece of music. So if that was indulging in their addiction, then that will make them want to indulge again.
I hadn't thought of that, but it's certainly worth pursuing. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, during the lockdown, I actually started a master's in psychology. And was particularly interested in social and biological psychology. And in the biological, addiction was one of the things they talked about. And they said environmental history very much plays a part in whether a person recovers or relapses. And music is part of that environmental history. Said it's a multi-sensory experience. So if they smell something and they think, oh, when I had a joint, there was this smell in the room before I lit up or whatever, and that will make them want to do that again. You know.
Yeah. Okay.
Same with music.
So I just have a quick question for you.
Yep.
Why purple?
Why purple? Well, that actually comes from the Canadian girl called Megan Cassidy. And she was sitting with her mom watching TV, and she's a young lady who lives with epilepsy. And there were all these ads on TV about World AIDS Day, World Breast Cancer Day, World this day, World that day. And she said to her mom, she said, but there's no epilepsy day. Uh,
Oh, right.
and her mum
Mm.
said, well, that's an interesting point. And she said, but if we're going to have a World Epilepsy Day, then we need a colour associated with it. And the first, the first draw, if you like, was lavender because lavender has been used as a therapeutic mechanism for treating all sorts of things in the day, including, I believe, epilepsy. But she said, if we generalize that color and say purple, it's much easier to get hold of purple uh, objects than lavender objects. So, yes, it's World Purple Day, and the purple association with epilepsy is down to Megan Cassidy.
Okay. Very interesting.
Yeah,
Because it used to be the color that was only for the top of any hierarchy or divinity, because it was you couldn't get it in the Greek times.
right,
Like, and I think probably it was just so expensive it didn't begin to permeate until the early Renaissance as a
right.
color. Yes, with Mary Magdalene begins to change the color of her clothes, particularly her adornment clothes, I think in the early Renaissance.
Hmm.
Before it might have been red or whatever,
Yeah.
but
And it's
purple has always
funny.
been very important as a color.
Yeah, and it's funny because since I started this project, I'm becoming increasingly aware of how many purple things there are around me.
Mm,
Like
mm,
if I'm working and a lady walks in wearing purple, or I'm walking down the street and there's purple flowers, or occasionally we get passengers with purple hair. You know, I'm sorry, I'm surrounded by purple, you know. And
yeah, yeah.
I suppose it would be the same if the
Mm,
color was red. I would notice everything red, you know. So I know it's just associate.
mm, yeah.
Um,
But anyway,
but just
um,
briefly going back to the popular music search, um, most artists who either use the name epilepsy in their artist name or their track names, in the vast majority of cases, that music has nothing to do with epilepsy at all. Um,
yeah.
it's simply a synonym for chaos, and in some cases, as Dr. Mia Tuft has highlighted, a synonym for sexualization as well, because of the crossovers therein. Um,
Mm.
do you think there's any particular reason why people in the field of music are very unforthcoming about expressing the experience of epilepsy in comparison to, say, the work of Julie Thompson Dobkin, who runs Hidden Truths Project, where she is inundated with visual artistic representations of epilepsy? Why do you think music is so far down in epilepsy experiential representation?
Well, I think you've already mentioned the name of one person I know who threatened to sue somebody who was going to not expose, but to talk about their epilepsy. In fact, and there's another very famous person who may or may not have had epilepsy, but when it came out that it was going to be uh, he was going to be not exposed but mentioned about epilepsy, again it very quickly went off the screens. because they're frightened. I think that epilepsy has bad connotations in many ways, and that's because most people don't know about the things we've been talking about. But I think they were threatening. If you say that I have epilepsy, there's going to be a big lawsuit, because that may then rebound and say, well, no wonder his music is like this, that, or the other. I mean, it can rebound. So I think people really don't like to talk about it generally.
Mm. I think that's something that collectively, as a purple chorus, to pardon the pun, uh, is that we have to collectively work on
Mm,
to make epilepsy not such a taboo word. And I mean, one of the statements that I made at the beginning of drawing all of this together is the fact that it's quite crazy that in 2025 we have over 65 million people around the world. And I say over because I know there are lots of reasons why we don't know the true figure, who live with epilepsy but still feel like they're on their own.
mm.
And
I think it's even worse than what, if I don't like to say the less developed countries, but the mythology is still very, very strong in
Mhm.
some settings where the mythologies are, well, we have a lot of mythology too, but they are not, well, they're taken in different ways. So
Mm.
I think the stigma is still there, and I think I've been writing about it, and other people have years beforehand,
Mm.
and it is still very difficult. But I think linking music might help a little bit
I
to
hope so.
harmonic resolution to
Yeah.
people. I just to come to the short end,
Hey,
are you going to be at the meeting in Lisbon?
I am,
Yeah,
yes.
because again, I'm not quite sure what it is that you might present, and I'm not
Haven't
entirely
been,
sure what we. I
haven't
think.
actually been invited to present at all.
No,
Uh,
don't worry about that, because we were not invited as well, although we sent in an abstract and whatever. But again, it just reflected the fact, I think, that, well, they don't want to listen to something on music, when there's some new anti-epileptic drug around or whatever. And of course, the big thing with cannabis,
mhm.
which became the most important medication there is for epilepsy that's intractable, is of interest. But it really has taken up much of the interest and would shelve something like epilepsy a little bit on one side. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
But well, it's been absolutely brilliant to talk to you this morning. It's been very educational as always. And what a trailblazing interview to follow for the rest of the people I have on here. But thank you immensely for your time, and I very much look forward to seeing you in Lisbon in a matter of weeks now. And so with that, I say thank you very much, Dr.
Okay.
Michael Trimble.
Okay. Nice to catch up with you again. Bye now. Bye.